I calmed 4 wild quadruplets who'd made 10 professional maids quit in less than 3 days. And all I did was sing. But maybe I should start from the beginning. When I was sleeping on a piece of cardboard outside Milan Central, clutching an empty coffee cup and pretending I wasn't starving. When I was so desperate for warmth, for purpose, for anything, that I answered a job posting that practically screamed danger. Live-in maid wanted. Room and board included. Generous pay. Must have patience. And underneath, scribbled in pen, no one lasts longer than 72 hours. I should have laughed. Or walked away. But when you've been invisible long enough, any chance to be seen feels like a miracle. My name is Anna Ferguson. I'm 27 years old, homeless, and trying to survive the Milan streets with nothing but my voice. Singing used to be my dream. Now it's just how I keep myself alive, one song, €1 coin at a time. That morning, I hadn't eaten in 2 days. My throat burned, my body ached, and I was ready to give up when I saw that ad taped to a cafe window. A maid position in a villa on the outskirts of the city. Room, food, pay up front. I didn't know then that the man behind the ad was Davide Greco, a name whispered like a curse in every alley of Milan. A man powerful enough to make people disappear. A man raising 4 sons who'd driven away every nanny, maid, and tutor foolish enough to step through his doors. I arrived at the Greco villa that evening, carrying everything I owned in a torn backpack. The house was marble and gold and tension, the kind of place that glowed with silence until it didn't. And then I heard it, screaming, for voices, small but fierce, echoing down the hallway. When I stepped into the playroom, it was chaos, broken toys, spilled juice, 4 identical little boys waging war on the furniture. One was crying, one was yelling, one was throwing a shoe at the wall, and the 4th just stood in the middle, shaking with rage. Someone muttered behind me, "Told you. No one lasts." But I didn't move. I didn't shout. I just sat down on the floor, cross-legged on the spotless marble, and started to sing. A lullaby my mother used to hum when I was small and scared of thunder. The boys froze. The room fell quiet. And that was how it began. The day a homeless street singer calmed a Mafia Boss's restless quadruplets with a song. The day my voice changed everything. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I love seeing where my Sasha Passion Story family is around the world. And if you're hooked on this story of a homeless lady who tamed wild quadruplets with song and love, hit that subscribe button and like this video. I post new emotional, dramatic love stories every day, and you don't want to miss the next one. Now, let's dive back into the story. By the time the taxi dropped me at the gates of the Greco villa, I was half convinced I'd made a mistake. The house looked like something carved out of another world. Tall black iron gates, marble pillars, trimmed hedges that smelled faintly of lemon. I stood there with my backpack slung over one shoulder, my guitar case bumping against my knee, painfully aware of how I must look. Hair tangled, clothes creased from sleeping rough, the faint scent of city smoke and rain still clinging to me. The guard at the gate gave me a once-over, his expression unreadable, before pressing a button that made the gates swing open. My heart hammered as I stepped through. The driveway curved upward, lined with rose bushes and expensive cars that looked too polished to touch. I wanted to turn back, but the thought of another night on cardboard kept my feet moving. When the heavy oak doors opened, I was greeted not by a maid or butler, but by a sound I hadn't expected, screaming. High-pitched, relentless, like a siren going off somewhere deep inside the house. Then came the crash of something breaking. A woman in a starched blouse appeared in the doorway, her face pale, hair frizzed like she'd just survived a storm. "You're the new applicant?" she asked, voice hoarse. I nodded. "Good luck," she muttered, stepping aside. "He said to show you the boys." I followed her down a long hallway that smelled faintly of polish and citrus. The deeper we went, the louder the noise became, tiny feet pounding, something thudding against the wall, a wail that made the hair on my arms rise. When we turned the corner, I froze. The playroom looked like a battlefield. Cushions torn open, juice dripping from the ceiling, tiny plastic soldiers strewn across the floor like casualties. For little boys, identical, wild-haired, barefoot, were in the middle of the chaos. One stood on the coffee table shouting orders. Another was drawing on the wall with a marker. The third was crying so hard his face had gone red. The fourth sat on the floor surrounded by blocks, methodically smashing them apart. The woman beside me sighed, rubbing her temples. "The last maid left an hour ago," she said. They threw pasta at her. I wanted to laugh, but my throat was too tight. Instead, I stepped forward. The second they saw me, the noise shifted. For pairs of bright brown eyes turned toward the stranger in the doorway. "Who's she?" the one on the coffee table demanded. "I'm Anna," I said quietly. "I think I'm here to help." That earned me a suspicious glare. "We don't need help," shouted another. He threw a wooden block in my direction. It hit my shoulder with a soft thunk. The woman made a distressed sound.
"C'est impossible."
"I'll go get Mr. Greco." "No," I said, surprising both of us. "Let me try." She hesitated, then shrugged helplessly and slipped out, shutting the door behind her. The noise swelled again. I stood in the middle of the mess, heart racing, trying to remember the last time I'd been in a room that wasn't chaos. Maybe it was the night before I lost my apartment. Maybe it was years ago when my mother was still alive and used to hum lullabies to me after the shouting stopped. I sank down slowly onto the floor, crossing my legs on the polished marble. The boys stared at me, confused. No one ever sits down in the middle of a storm. "You know," I said softly, "this room sounds like thunder." One of them, smaller, maybe the youngest, blinked at me. "Thunder?" "But do you know what happens after thunder?" They didn't answer, but they stopped throwing things. That was something. I reached for my guitar case, unlatched it, and lifted the old instrument out. The strings were worn, the body scratched, but it still held its tune. I brushed my fingers across it, humming the melody before the words came. It was an old Italian lullaby, one my mother used to sing in a cramped apartment when I couldn't sleep. My voice was hoarse from the cold, but the notes came out soft, steady. The boys went still. The one who'd been crying hiccuped mid-sob. Another slid off the coffee table and sat cross-legged on the rug, watching my hands. "Dormi, piccino, dormi nel blu." Their little heads tilted. The chaos melted, piece by piece. I kept singing, my voice barely above a whisper, letting the melody fill the air like a blanket. By the time the song ended, all four were sitting on the floor, breathing quietly. One leaned against another. The littlest one's eyes fluttered like he was about to fall asleep. I exhaled, realizing my own hands were shaking. That's when I heard the door open behind me. The air shifted. Heavy footsteps. The kind that made the floorboards seem to hold their breath. I didn't have to look to know it was him. The man whose name carried both power and danger. "What?" His voice drawled, low and sharp. "Did you do to them?" I turned. Davide Greco stood in the doorway, a tall figure in a dark suit, his jaw shadowed, eyes cold and calculating. In one hand, he held a phone. In the other, a half-melted ice cream cone, dripping onto his sleeve. "I sang," I said simply. He looked at his sons, then back at me. For the first time, I saw something flicker behind those hard eyes, something like disbelief. "They've never been this quiet," he murmured. Maybe no one ever listened long enough to hear what they were really saying. I replied before I could stop myself. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of my guitar still vibrating against the floor. Then Davide's mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "You'll start today," he said. "Room and board. Triple pay if you last 72 hours. He turned and walked out without waiting for an answer. The boys looked up at me, their faces softer now. One of them whispered, "Can you sing again?" I smiled, my chest tightening. Every night if you want. And as I began the lullaby once more, the house that had sounded like a battlefield started, slowly, to breathe. When Davide Greco reappeared in the doorway, the playroom was still wrapped in the soft echo of my lullaby. The boys had drifted closer, small heads resting on each other's shoulders, eyelids heavy. It was like watching 4 hurricanes fall asleep mid-storm. For a second, no one moved. Then his voice cut through the quiet. Who told you to touch them? It wasn't loud, but it carried the kind of authority that made air feel thinner. I turned slowly. He stood there in a perfectly tailored suit, sleeves rolled up just enough to show the edges of tattoos creeping along his forearms. His dark hair was slicked back, his jaw clenched, his expression carved out of ice. He didn't look like a man used to being disobeyed. No one, I said, my voice barely steady. They were upset. His gaze swept over me, from my tangled hair to the worn sweater hanging off my shoulders, to the guitar still balanced on my knees. I could almost see him calculating, assessing the dirt under my nails, the cracks in my skin, the way I didn't belong in his immaculate world. And your solution was to sing? Yes, I whispered. Something unreadable flickered across his face. He stepped into the room, the polished floors muting under his shoes. The boys stirred slightly, but none of them screamed. His eyes flicked toward them, then back to me. They're quiet, he said, as though testing the word. They're tired, I said softly. Not just from playing, from not being understood. That earned me a long, sharp look. The kind of look that could slice through excuses. What's your name? Anna Ferguson. Ferguson, he repeated, tasting the word like he wasn't sure what to do with it. You're not Italian. No, sir. And you're applying to be a maid? Yes. He studied me again. The silence stretched. In the corner of the room, one of the boys shifted in his sleep and murmured something that sounded like mama. Davide's eyes flicked toward him, and for a heartbeat his mask cracked. Something raw moved behind his gaze, grief, maybe, or guilt, but it vanished almost instantly.
Follow me, he said.
I set my guitar down gently and followed him through a corridor lined with gold-framed paintings and mirrors, so clean they looked like water. The faint hum of my own footsteps echoed too loudly. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Every instinct told me to run. But hunger, hope, and exhaustion kept me walking. He led me into an office that smelled of leather and tobacco. The kind of room built for intimidation. He moved behind a massive desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. Here, he said, placing it on the desk. A week's advance. If you accept the job. My mouth went dry. Advance. You'll live here full-time. Room, board, and salary. Triple what the ad promised. My breath caught. It felt like a dream, one wrapped in danger, but still a dream. Why me? I asked quietly. He leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow arching. You walked into a war zone and put 4 devils to sleep with a song. Either you're insane, or you're a miracle. I'm willing to pay for either one. I couldn't help the nervous laugh that slipped out. It sounded small, broken, but real. You don't even know me. I don't need to, he said. All I need to know is that my son stopped screaming for the first time in months. The room fell silent again, heavy with something unspoken. His gaze stayed on me, sharp and unreadable, like he was trying to decide whether I was a threat or salvation. I'll have someone show you your quarters, he said finally. You start now. I blinked.
Now.
He nodded. If you last 72 hours, we'll discuss permanent terms. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words tangled. 3 days. Just 3 days to prove I wasn't another name on his list of failures. Mr. Greco. I began, hesitating. Thank you. He lifted a hand, cutting me off. Don't thank me yet. His voice softened, almost imperceptibly. Just keep them quiet. He stood, and for a fleeting second I caught a hint of something human beneath the polished armor, a man carrying the weight of too much responsibility and not enough peace. Then he turned away, already reaching for his phone, already retreating back into his world of power and silence. A woman in black appeared at the doorway and gestured for me to follow. She led me up a winding staircase, past portraits of people who looked too perfect to be real. The room she showed me was small but spotless, a single bed, a window overlooking the garden, a dresser, a tiny adjoining bathroom. It felt like paradise compared to the concrete and cold air I'd been sleeping in. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the envelope in my lap. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was more money than I'd seen in years. Enough to eat. Enough to live. For a moment, I just sat there, tears burning behind my eyes. The reality of it hit all at once. The chance, the fear, the miracle of being here. Outside the door, I could hear the faint sound of laughter. The boys were awake again, lighter this time, the chaos replaced by something softer. I pressed a hand to my mouth to muffle a sob. Then I smiled through it, whispering to myself, "You did it, Anna. You finally made someone listen." And somewhere down the hall, Davide Greco paused mid-step, listening too. The first morning began with screaming. Not frightened screams, furious ones. The kind that vibrate through walls and rattle something deep inside you. I'd been asleep for maybe 2 hours when the noise pulled me upright. For a moment, I forgot where I was. The bed was too soft. The air smelled of lemon polish instead of damp concrete. Then I remembered. The villa, the boys, the job I'd promised to survive for 72 hours. I pulled on the clean uniform left neatly on the chair. White blouse, black skirt, apron, and tried to ignore the ache in my bones. Downstairs, the kitchen was a gleaming cathedral of marble and chrome. The housekeeper, Lucia, was already there, pale and exhausted, whisking eggs like she was trying to outrun something. "Good morning," I offered. She gave a tired smile. "If you're smart, you'll leave before lunch." I almost laughed, but then a crash from the dining room made both of us flinch. Lucia closed her eyes and sighed. "They're awake." I stepped through the doorway and straight into chaos. For small boys were waging war with breakfast. Toast pieces on the floor. Orange juice dripping off the chandelier. One of them, Leo, I thought, was standing on a chair yelling, "No eggs," while another beat a spoon against the table like a drum. They froze when they saw me, just for a heartbeat. Then Ricardo, the ringleader, squinted suspiciously. "You came back," he said. "I did," I said softly, tying my apron tighter. "Good morning." Aurelio threw a piece of toast at me. It hit my chest and slid to the floor. "Okay," I said, breathing in slowly. "That's one way to say hello." They tested me all morning. They refused to eat unless I sang. They refused to sit unless I told them a story. When I tried to tidy the mess, they followed me around, undoing every bit of order I created. By afternoon, my arms were covered in flour and syrup, and I was starting to wonder if maybe Davide Greco was right. Maybe I was insane. But every time one of the boys screamed, I reminded myself, they're not demons. They're scared. That night was the hardest. They wouldn't sleep. They jumped on their beds, argued over who got which blanket, howled for their father, who didn't come. I tried stories. I tried quiet warnings. Nothing worked. My head throbbed, my throat burned, and tears threatened to spill when I heard Leo whisper to his brother, "She'll leave, too." That stopped me cold. I sank down on the carpet between their beds and whispered, "No, I won't." They didn't believe me. I could see it in their wary little eyes. So I reached for my guitar. The same melody I'd sung that first day floated out into the dimly lit room, soft and steady. One by one their bodies stilled. Aurelio curled against his pillow. Savino clutched his stuffed elephant. Ricardo blinked sleepily, fighting it until the very last note. When silence finally fell, I stayed sitting there, too tired to move, tears sliding down my cheeks before I could stop them. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt useful. The next day brought more battles. They refused lunch. Leo upended his bowl of pasta in protest. Ricardo hid in a closet and refused to come out for an hour. Aurelio spilled juice across the hallway just to see my reaction. Savino bit his brother when he didn't get the red toy car. But between the tantrums, I started noticing tiny changes. How Savino looked at me for approval before he did something bad. How Leo tried to sing the lullaby under his breath when he thought no one was listening. How Ricardo, the loudest of them all, flinched whenever someone raised their voice. On the second night, I found them all in the living room after dinner, sitting on the rug in a line, waiting. I asked what they were doing.
"We want the song," Leo said.
I smiled so hard it hurt. By the end of the second day, I was bruised, exhausted, but also strangely lighter. The housekeeper watched me like I was some kind of miracle. Even Davide's security guards had stopped looking so skeptical. The villa itself seemed to breathe differently, less tension in the air, fewer slammed doors. On the third morning, Davide appeared in the doorway of the kitchen while I was making breakfast. He didn't say a word at first, just watched me pour juice into 4 little cups while the boys chattered quietly at the table. None of them threw anything. None of them screamed. "You lasted longer than most," he said finally. "It's only been 2 days," I said, without looking up. He stepped closer, his presence heavy, magnetic. "It's been 54 hours, he corrected. "No one's ever made it past 20. I glanced up then. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, dark, intense, seemed softer than before. "They just need to be heard," I said. He nodded slightly. "Maybe." He turned to go, then paused. "You'll make it to 72. It sounded less like a statement and more like a quiet promise. That night, the boys fell asleep to the sound of my lullaby again, their breathing even, their tiny hands tangled together. I sat in the doorway long after the last note faded, staring at the 4 of them and thinking how fragile peace can be. When I finally checked the clock, it read 11:47 p.m. 71 hours and 47 minutes. 15 minutes later, the villa was silent. Not the heavy silence of fear, but the soft kind, the kind that belongs to homes that are finally starting to heal. At hour 72, I smiled in the dark, whispered goodnight, and let myself believe, just for a moment, that maybe I'd found a place to belong. 3 weeks passed before I learned who Davide Greco really was. By then, the villa had settled into a rhythm that almost felt like peace. The boys woke up to my singing, ate breakfast without throwing food, and fell asleep every night curled together like 4 small lions who finally trusted that the world wouldn't hurt them in their sleep. Even Davide's men, those stoic guards who stood like shadows in the hallways, had started nodding at me when I passed. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know why there were always black cars coming and going, or why every phone call Davide took seemed to harden his jaw. I told myself he was just a powerful businessman, the kind who made people nervous because they owed him money, not fear. But deep down, something about the quiet way people moved around him, careful, deferential, afraid to meet his eyes, told me there was more to the story. The truth found me by accident. It was late, long after the boys were asleep. I'd gone downstairs for water and heard voices from Davide's office. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling into the hall. I didn't mean to listen. I froze halfway past the door when I heard my name. "The new maid," someone was saying, voice low and tense. "She's been here 3 weeks. Too close to the children." Davide's voice followed, calm but edged like steel. "She's not a threat. You can't be sure. If anyone finds out she's living here, no one will," Davide said, final and cold. "And if they do, I'll handle it." There was a pause. Then the other man whispered, Don Greco, We can't afford any weakness.
Dawn.
The word hit like a slap. I backed away, heart pounding, the glass of water trembling in my hand. I didn't need to hear more. The whispers, the guarded glances, the unmarked cars, it all made sense. The man I worked for, the man whose sons I sang to sleep every night, wasn't just rich. He was dangerous. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the hallway sounded like a threat. Every memory of him, his quiet intensity, his careful kindness toward the boys, suddenly seemed sharper, heavier with meaning. By morning, my hands were shaking as I poured cereal. "Are you sick?" Ricardo asked, peering up at me. "No, amore," I said quickly. "Just tired." But when Davide walked in, dressed in black, speaking softly into his phone, I couldn't look at him the same way. He noticed immediately. His eyes lingered on me longer than usual. After breakfast, he told me to meet him in his office. The moment I stepped inside, he closed the door. The air felt thick, humming with something unspoken. "You heard last night," he said quietly. There was no point pretending. I nodded. He sighed, leaning against the desk, arms crossed. "You're afraid." "I should be," I said. "Everyone else seems to be." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he crossed to me slowly, not like a threat, but like someone approaching a wounded animal. "I never wanted you to find out like that. I've been living under your roof for 3 weeks, taking care of your children, and you didn't think I had the right to know who you are?" My voice trembled more than I wanted it to. "What if someone came for you? For them?" His jaw tightened. "That's why there are guards. No one touches my family." "Family?" I laughed softly, shaking my head. "You think they're safe because you can scare the world into silence? They need you to be here, not hiding behind bodyguards in fear." Something in his expression changed then. Less anger, more pain. "You sound like my wife," he murmured. The words slipped into the air like ghosts. I hesitated. "Their mother?" He nodded, eyes unfocused. "She wanted to leave this life. I promised her I'd find a way out. She died before I could." The silence between us stretched, fragile and raw. I wanted to hate him for what he was, but all I could see was the exhaustion in his eyes, the same kind I used to see in my own reflection when I still lived on the streets. "I didn't mean to listen," I said softly. I know what it's like to live in fear." He looked at me, then really looked. "What do you mean?" And before I could stop myself, it all came spilling out. The years with Marco. The shouting, the bruises, the endless apologies. The night he threw me out because I wouldn't give him more money. The weeks I slept under train station lights, singing for coins, so I wouldn't starve. "I thought I'd die out there," I said, voice breaking. "Until I saw your ad. I just wanted a chance. A roof. Somewhere I didn't have to look over my shoulder." Davide's face went still, but his eyes burned. "Who did that to you?" "It doesn't matter," I whispered. He stepped closer, his voice low, dangerous in its control. "Tell me his name." I shook my head. "He's gone." Davide's jaw flexed. For a moment, the mask cracked again, and I saw the man beneath, the one who ruled through fear but carried more of it than he'd ever admit. Then his voice dropped to a near whisper. "No one will ever hurt you again, Anna. You're under my protection now." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to ignore the part of me that knew how dangerous that promise was, how easily protection could turn into possession. But when he said it, I felt something in my chest unclench. "Why?" I asked. "You don't even know me." He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because my sons smile when you walk into a room. Because the house feels alive again. Because you make them, and me, remember we're still human." The tears came before I could stop them. He reached out as if to touch my face, then thought better of it, his hand falling away. "Go rest," he said softly. "The world outside this villa is ugly. But while you're here, no one touches you." As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of him in the reflection of the window, alone, staring at nothing, the weight of his world pressing down like a shadow he could never step out of. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe I wasn't the only one who needed saving. The first time one of them called me Mama Anna, it slipped out so naturally, I almost missed it. It was a sunny afternoon in the garden, 3 weeks after that night in Davide's office. The boys were building a fort out of cardboard boxes and stolen couch cushions, their laughter echoing through the courtyard like something holy. I was sitting cross-legged in the grass, pretending to read, half watching them, half lost in thought. Savino, the smallest, tripped over his shoelace and burst into frustrated tears. I set the book down and went to him, brushing dirt from his knees. "It's all right, amore. Nothing's broken," I said gently, tying his lace. He sniffled, nodded, and then whispered it, soft, hesitant, like testing a new word. "Thank you, Mama Anna." The world seemed to still. The other boys froze mid, fort building, eyes wide. Savino looked up at me, waiting for permission to take it back. I didn't make a sound. I just smiled and pressed my forehead against his, whispering, "You can call me that if you want." That was it. The next day, they all did. "Mama Anna, can you help me tie this?" "Mama Anna." He stole my crayon. "Mama Anna, sing the thunder song again." The title wasn't forced, wasn't something we talked about, it simply became part of the air we breathed. I didn't dare correct them, though every time they said it, something in my chest ached so beautifully I almost couldn't stand it. Davide noticed, of course. He noticed everything. One night, after the boys had fallen asleep, I found him standing in the doorway of the playroom, watching them. The moonlight caught on his features, softening the hard lines that power had carved there. "They call you Mama Anna now," he said quietly. I turned from where I was gathering toys.
"Yes."
It just happened. His eyes stayed on the boys, for small bodies tangled together under one blanket. "They've never said that word before," he murmured. My heart squeezed. "Never." He shook his head. "They lost their mother at birth. They never knew her voice. Never heard the word Mama said back to them." He exhaled, a sound halfway between grief and disbelief. "Sometimes I think they've been waiting for her to come back in another form." I didn't know what to say. There was something in his voice I hadn't heard before, fragility, like glass about to crack. I took a slow step closer. "They weren't waiting for her," I said softly. "They were waiting for love." He looked at me, then really looked, as if trying to see how I fit into the empty space that haunted his house. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with ghosts and gratitude. Over the next few days, something shifted in all of us. The house felt less like a fortress and more like a home. The boys started running down the hallways instead of tiptoeing. Laughter replaced the sound of slamming doors. Even the guards smiled sometimes. We began eating dinner together at the long dining table instead of separate rooms. The first time, the boys talked over one another so loudly that Davide just leaned back and watched, a faint smile playing at his mouth. "They're loud," he said quietly to me when the boys were arguing over dessert. "Loud is good," I replied. "Loud means they feel safe." He nodded, his gaze softening. "You've changed everything here." "I didn't do it alone," I said. "They were just waiting for someone to listen." Later that night, as I tucked the boys in, Ricardo asked, "Does Papa ever sing?" I laughed softly. "I don't think he's the singing type." Leo frowned thoughtfully. "Maybe he just needs a song." When I left their room, I found Davide in his office, staring at an old photograph on his desk. It was of a woman, dark hair, kind eyes, the sort of beauty that lingered. I recognized her immediately. "She was beautiful," I said quietly. He didn't look up. Her name was Elisa. She was everything I wasn't. I waited. He didn't stop me, so I sat across from him, the desk between us like a fragile border. "I promised her I'd keep the boys safe," he said after a long silence. "But every time they look at me, I see what I failed to protect. I thought distance would shield them. That love was too dangerous. His voice broke slightly on the word. But you walk in here with nothing, and suddenly they're laughing again. They sleep through the night. They call you Mama. I felt tears rise before I could stop them. You didn't fail them, Davide. You just forgot what they needed. You forgot what you needed. He looked up at me then, and for the first time, there was no mask, no steel. Just a man stripped bare of all the armor that kept him standing. I don't know how to be their father, he admitted quietly. Yes, you do, I said, my voice trembling. You just did it. You let them love you. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was gentle, filled with everything we weren't ready to say. When I finally left his office, the hallway was dark except for the faint glow from the boys' room. I stopped at their door and listened for small voices humming the lullaby I'd sung them, off-key and perfect. Davide appeared behind me, barefoot, sleeves rolled up, watching them through the crack. They sound awful, he murmured. I smiled, wiping at my eyes. They sound alive. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Do you ever think about leaving? I shook my head. Not anymore. His gaze lingered on me for a long moment, something tender flickering there. Then I hope you never do, he said quietly. As I walked back to my room, the sound of the boys' voices followed me down the hall, their soft, unsteady harmony wrapping around my heart like a promise. And for the first time in years, I believed it, this was home. The morning of their 5th birthday dawned bright and warm, sunlight spilling through the villa windows like gold dust. I woke to the sound of footsteps racing down the hallway, for pairs of them, followed by the unmistakable chorus of giggling and whispered plotting. They thought I couldn't hear them. They were wrong. By the time I stepped into the hall, the quadruplets were lined up outside my door, hair sticking up, pajamas rumpled, faces full of expectation.
Mamma Anna.
Ricardo shouted. You have to come now.
Now.
I asked, pretending to yawn. Before breakfast? Yes. Leo grabbed my hand, tugging me toward the stairs. Papa said there's a surprise. Downstairs, the villa looked like a dream. Balloons floated against the ceiling. Streamers hung from chandeliers. The long dining table was buried under mountains of wrapped gifts and enough pastries to feed an army. In the garden beyond the glass doors, tents had been set up, bright with ribbons and flowers. I blinked, laughing in disbelief. You did all this? I asked Davide, who was standing near the terrace, hands in his pockets, looking far too composed for a man who'd just turned his home into a children's carnival. He shrugged lightly. They're 5. I wanted them to remember it. The day unfolded in bursts of color and laughter. A magician appeared out of nowhere, pulling doves from hats and candy from thin air. A pair of ponies trotted in the garden, the boys riding them with squeals of pure joy. Even Davide smiled, really smiled, as he followed them around, watching their faces light up. The staff looked happier too, their usual stiffness replaced by something almost like affection. For once, no one seemed afraid of anything. I spent most of the afternoon making sure no one fell into the fountain or ate too many cupcakes. The boys ran circles around me, faces sticky with frosting, arms full of toys. When the sun dipped low, the garden lights flickered on, wrapping the villa in a soft golden glow. The giant cake, 5 tiers tall, white and blue and glittering with sugar stars, was rolled out by 2 chefs. Davide stood behind the boys as they blew out their candles, his hands resting gently on their shoulders. The way he looked at them made my throat tighten. It wasn't the look of a man used to power or fear. It was love, unguarded and fierce. After the cheers faded, I caught his eye. He gave a small nod, the kind that said it's time. I climbed the few steps to the small stage near the garden's edge, my guitar waiting for me. The crowd of guests and staff quieted as I adjusted the microphone. My hands trembled slightly on the strings. The boys sat cross-legged at the front, their eyes wide with anticipation. Davide stood behind them, watching me like I was the only person in the world. "I wrote this for 4 little miracles," I said softly, "and the Father who gave them the world." Then I began to play. The song was simple, 4 verses, one for each boy, their names woven into the melody. A lullaby turned celebration, a promise turned prayer. The words spoke of laughter after storms, of tiny hands finding safety, of a home built not from marble but from love. As I sang, I saw the boys sway with the rhythm, eyes shining. When I reached the last verse, about finding light in unexpected places, I glanced up and found Davide's gaze locked on mine. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those dark, guarded eyes, were glistening. The final note hung in the air, soft and trembling. Then the garden erupted in applause. The boys cheered my name. I bowed, cheeks warm, trying not to cry. Later, when the guests had left and the boys were upstairs in their new matching pajamas, surrounded by gifts and sugar dreams, I slipped out to the terrace for some quiet. The night air was cool, fragrant with jasmine. The city lights sparkled beyond the hills, distant and safe. Davide found me there. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him. "They loved your song," he said finally, voice low. "So did I replied softly. It felt right. He nodded slowly, eyes on the stars. "You've given them something I couldn't." "You've given them everything," I said. "Safety. A home." He turned toward me then, his expression unguarded. "Safety isn't love, Anna. I thought I could protect them with walls and silence, but you," he paused, as if searching for the right words. "You taught them to laugh again. You taught me to breathe again." I swallowed hard, my heart thudding painfully. "Davide." He stepped closer, close enough that I could see the faint scar near his jaw, the shadow of exhaustion beneath his eyes. "Do you know what I thought when I first saw you in that playroom?" he asked. I shook my head. "I thought you'd break," he said quietly. "That the world had already taken too much from you. But you didn't break. You built something out of nothing. You made us all believe again." Before I could reply, he reached up, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed a strand of hair from my face. His touch was careful, hesitant, like he was asking permission. I didn't move. Then he kissed me. It wasn't the kind of kiss born from impulse or hunger. It was slow, deep, full of everything we hadn't said. The world seemed to fall away until there was only the warmth of his lips and the sound of our hearts finding the same rhythm. When he finally pulled back, I couldn't breathe. My eyes burned with tears I hadn't expected. "I don't know how to be loved," I whispered. He cupped my face, his thumb tracing a tear down my cheek. "Then let me show you." I wanted to believe him. Standing there under the stars, the villa quiet behind us, the scent of jasmine thick in the air, I almost did. For the first time in years, love didn't feel like something that would break me. It felt like something I could learn to hold. It was just after sunset when the past came to find me. The boys were upstairs, laughing in the bath, their voices spilling down the hall like music. The villa glowed with the soft hum of evening, candles flickering, the faint scent of dinner still hanging in the air. Everything felt warm, safe, whole. For the first time in my life, I believed the worst was behind me. Then Lucia came running into the kitchen, her face pale. "There's a man at the gate," she said breathlessly. "He says he knows you." The world seemed to tilt. I didn't have to ask who. The chill that ran through me was enough to tell me the truth.
Marco.
I stepped outside before anyone could stop me. The air was cool and sharp, the last of the daylight bleeding into darkness. I followed the long drive toward the gates, my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. He was there, just beyond the iron bars, leaner than I remembered, but still wearing that same crooked smile that had once made me mistake danger for charm. His leather jacket was frayed, his eyes bloodshot. "Anna," he said, voice low and familiar, like he thought the sound of it could still undo me. "You look different. Richer." I stopped a few feet away, my hands trembling despite how tightly I clenched them. "You need to leave." He laughed, the sound grating and cruel. "No hello?" "After everything we had, there's nothing left to say." "Oh, I think there is." He leaned against the gate, his eyes flicking up toward the villa's lights. "You've done well for yourself. Living in a mansion now. Working for Milan's favorite ghost. Don't look so surprised, sweetheart. You think I don't know who he is?" My stomach twisted. "You don't know anything." "Oh, I know enough." He smirked.
Davide Greco.
"The man the police can never quite catch. You think he'll keep you safe when he finds out who I am? When I tell him you're the one who told me everything?" "I never." "Doesn't matter," he cut in. "All I have to do is make one call. The authorities would love a reason to raid this place. I bet your precious boss wouldn't be so generous after that." He was bluffing. I prayed he was, but the way his eyes glinted made my stomach knot with fear. "What do you want?" I asked quietly. "You," he said simply. "Come with me. Tonight. We disappear like old times. I'll forget all about this little fairy tale you've built." My heart hammered against my ribs. I glanced toward the villa, toward the lives sleeping safely inside, and felt something rise in me, steady and fierce. The woman he'd broken no longer existed. "I'm not yours anymore," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough for him to hear. "I'm not scared of you." He laughed again, harsh and ugly. "You were always scared, Anna. That's what I liked about you. So easy to control." I stepped closer to the gate, close enough to see the stubble on his jaw, the bitterness etched into his skin. "Not anymore," I whispered. "You don't get to touch this life. You don't get to take it from me." Something flickered in his expression, anger, maybe surprise. His hand shot out, gripping the bars, knuckles white. "You think he loves you? You're just another toy to him. When he's done, he'll throw you away like everyone else." "No," I said. "He's not like you." For a moment, the silence between us felt alive, pulsing with everything we'd both lost. Then headlights flared behind me, one of the guards' cars pulling up fast. Marco's smirk faltered. "Leave," I said, voice steady now. "Before he finds you here." His gaze hardened. "You think I'm scared of your mafia boyfriend?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because you should be." He hesitated, caught between arrogance and self-preservation. Then he spat on the ground, turned, and started toward the road. "This isn't over," he called over his shoulder. "You'll regret choosing him." I stood there until his shadow disappeared into the night, my knees threatening to give out. When I finally turned back toward the villa, Davide was standing at the top of the drive. I hadn't even heard him approach. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those dark, dangerous eyes, were burning. "Who was that?" His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. I hesitated, then whispered, "My past." He walked closer, slow, deliberate, his presence filling the space around me. "You should have called me." I needed to face him, I said quietly. I needed to know I could. For a moment, he just looked at me, the anger in him warring with something else, something raw and protective. Then he exhaled, stepping close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. "You were trembling," he said softly. "I was terrified." "And yet you stood there," he murmured. "Alone." The tremor in my hands finally broke through, and he reached out, catching them in his own. His touch was steady, grounding. "He won't come back," Davide said. "Not while I'm breathing." "Don't," I whispered. "Don't do anything rash." His jaw clenched. "I protect what's mine." "I'm not yours," I said, but the words came out too soft, too uncertain. His eyes met mine unreadable. "Then whose are you?" The truth lodged somewhere deep in my chest. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The villa lights flickered across his face, and for a heartbeat, the world felt painfully still. He brushed his thumb across my cheek, just once, before letting go. "Go to the boys," he said. "I'll take care of the rest." I turned toward the villa, my legs unsteady, my heart pounding in my throat. Somewhere behind me, the gate groaned shut, sealing off the darkness. Inside, the boys were already asleep, their little faces peaceful, untroubled. I stood in the doorway watching them, my reflection faint in the window. I had faced the ghosts that once owned me, and for the first time, I hadn't run. It happened the next night. The air outside the villa felt strange, too still, too heavy, like the sky was waiting for something to break. I had barely slept. Every sound made me tense. Every shadow on the wall looked like it might step forward. But the boys were safe. That was all that mattered. Davide had said nothing since the gate. He'd simply kissed the top of my head and told me to go inside. He'd stayed outside with his men, his expression carved from marble. I'd known that look. It was the face of a man making decisions he couldn't take back. By morning, Marco was gone. Lucia told me she'd seen Davide leave at dawn. Black car, tinted windows, 3 of his men with him. He hadn't come home until late that night, the silence around him darker than before. When he finally found me in the music room, the boys asleep upstairs, I knew before he spoke that something final had been done. "He won't bother you again," Davide said simply. I looked up from the piano, my hands frozen mid-note. "What do you mean?" He took off his jacket and draped it over a chair, his movements too controlled, too calm. "I met him this morning. We came to an agreement." My stomach tightened. "What kind of agreement?" "The kind that ensures you sleep without fear." He stepped closer, his tone quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. "He's been paid enough to start a new life. Somewhere far from here. He signed documents, legal ones. He can't contact you again. Ever." I stared at him, my throat dry. "And if he breaks that agreement?" Davide's eyes flicked up, dark and unyielding. "He won't." The certainty in his voice scared me as much as it comforted me. I stood slowly, feeling the tremor in my hands. "What did you do, Davide?" He was silent for a long moment, the only sound the faint ticking of the old clock behind us. Then he said, "Nothing I regret." I walked toward him, searching his face. "Did you hurt him?"
His jaw tightened.
"He hurt you." "That's not an answer." He exhaled, rubbing a hand across his mouth. I made him understand what happens when someone threatens what's mine. There was again that word, heavy and dangerous.
"Meaning?"
"I didn't ask you to." "No," he said, stepping closer, his voice soft but burning. "You didn't. You would never ask. That's why I did." I turned away, gripping the edge of the piano to steady myself. Part of me wanted to scream. The other part, the one that remembered nights under bridges, the way Marco's voice could turn from sweet to venom in a single breath, felt only relief. "You shouldn't have to protect me," I said finally. "I'm not your responsibility." He laughed once, low and humorless. "You think this is about responsibility?" I looked back at him. His face was shadowed, unreadable, but his eyes, those dark, impossible eyes, were full of something raw. "Anna," he said quietly, "you walked into my house when it was falling apart. You calmed 4 boys no one could reach. You made them believe in love again. You made me believe in it again. You think I could ever see you as anything but mine?" My breath caught. "Davide." He crossed the room before I could think, taking my hands in his. His touch was warm, grounding, the roughness of his palms against my skin pulling me back from the storm. "I did what I had to do," he said.
"He's gone.
You're safe." And now, he paused, the smallest hint of vulnerability breaking through the steel. "Now I'm asking you to stay. Not as an employee. Not as their caretaker." I stared at him, heart racing. What are you saying? He took a slow breath. Marry me, Anna. The words seemed to echo, soft but impossible to ignore. Be their mother, he continued, his voice trembling for the first time since I'd known him. Be mine. I couldn't speak. My mind filled with everything we'd been through. The boys' laughter, their tiny hands clutching mine, the nights I'd sung until dawn. The woman who'd once begged for coins outside a train station was being asked to marry a man who ruled a world of danger and devotion. Davide, I whispered, shaking my head. You don't have to do this because you feel. This isn't about debt, he interrupted, his grip tightening around my hands. It's about love. It's about family. It's about the life I thought I could never have again until you walked through my door smelling like rain and sang my house back to life. Tears blurred my vision. I don't know how to be a wife, I said softly. Or a mother. Not really. He reached up, brushing his thumb along my jaw. You already are both. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The world outside the windows was silent, the moonlight pooling across the marble floor. Somewhere upstairs, I heard one of the boys stir in his sleep and murmur, Mama Anna.
That sound broke me.
I felt the tears spill over, warm against my skin. Davide's hand slid to the back of my neck, pulling me gently closer until our foreheads touched. Say yes, he whispered. Let's stop surviving and start living. I closed my eyes. The ghosts of my past still lingered, but they no longer had teeth. The man standing in front of me was dangerous. Yes, but his danger was matched only by the way he loved, fiercely and without apology. When I finally spoke, my voice trembled, but it carried truth. Yes. He exhaled sharply, like a man who'd been holding his breath for years. Then he kissed me, slow, certain, sealing a promise neither of us would ever undo. That night, as I lay in his arms, the house quiet around us, I realized something I never thought I would. Sometimes safety doesn't come from running away from darkness. It comes from finding someone who will stand inside it with you and make it feel like home. The chapel was small, hidden behind the olive trees at the far edge of the villa's gardens, a place that looked like it had been waiting for this moment all along. The air smelled of jasmine and candle wax, and the light through the stained glass painted everything in shades of gold and rose. I stood at the altar, hands trembling slightly, the lace of my dress brushing against my wrists. It wasn't in a grand gown, just something simple, elegant, borrowed from one of the housekeepers who had once been a seamstress. Davide stood across from me, dressed in a black suit that made his eyes look darker, softer. The boys sat together in the front row, small and restless in matching bow ties. Leo kept tugging at his collar, Ricardo held the rings like they were a secret mission, and Savino and Aurelio whispered loudly enough that the priest had to hide a smile. When the ceremony began, I barely heard the words. Everything blurred, the murmured blessings, the flicker of candlelight, the gentle breeze that stirred my veil. All I could see was the man standing before me, the one who had built his life from control and silence, now promising forever with a voice that trembled slightly on my name. When he slipped the ring onto my finger, his hand brushed mine and lingered there, a quiet vow beneath the spoken one. With this ring, he said softly, I give you everything I thought I could never have. I felt the tears before I could stop them. And I give you everything I never thought I deserved. The boys clapped when the priest finally said, You may kiss the bride. And Davide laughed, a sound so warm it filled the whole room. His kiss was gentle, reverent, and when he pulled back, I saw something I hadn't before. Peace. Afterward, we had lunch on the terrace. Nothing extravagant, just food, music, and laughter. The boys chased each other between tables, the staff toasted quietly, and Davide kept his hand on the small of my back like he couldn't quite believe I was real. The adoption came a few weeks later, in a white room that smelled faintly of paper and fresh paint. The judge smiled as he read the final words, his tone kind. "Congratulations, Mrs. Greco," he said. "You are now the legal mother of Leo, Ricardo, Aurelio, and Savino Greco." The boys cheered. Leo threw his arms around my waist. Ricardo puffed out his chest like he was protecting me. Savino wiped at his eyes but pretended he wasn't crying. Aurelio, the quietest, looked up at me and said, "We told you you were already our mama." Davide was behind us, his hand resting on my shoulder, pride and emotion mingling in his eyes. "Now it's official," he said, his voice rough. That night, we celebrated in the garden under a string of lights that sparkled like stars. The boys danced barefoot in the grass, their laughter echoing through the warm summer air. Davide and I sat side by side, watching them, our fingers intertwined. "They look happy," I said softly. "They are," he replied. "Because of you." I shook my head, smiling. "Because of us." He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear.
Forever, Mamma Anna.
6 months passed, and life settled into something I once thought impossible. Something quiet, safe, beautiful. I enrolled in university, studying music therapy. The first day I walked into the lecture hall, guitar case slung over my shoulder, I felt the weight of everything I'd survived. Music had saved me once. Now I wanted to learn how to use it to save others. The villa changed, too. It no longer felt like a fortress. The guards still stood at the gates, but their expressions had softened. The halls echoed with laughter instead of silence. The dining room, once a cold space of crystal and formality, had become the heart of our home. Every morning, the boys burst into our bedroom before sunrise, climbing into bed, shouting over each other until Davide groaned and pulled the blanket over his head. He tried to keep his image of the stern, powerful Don, but he failed every time Savino tackled him or Aurelio kissed his cheek. I caught him once in the garden, helping Ricardo build a wooden car. He didn't see me at first, his suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up, sawdust on his hands. He looked up when I laughed, and for a moment, the world felt suspended in something so pure it almost hurt. Later that night, as the boys slept, I sat by the window with my notebook, writing the melody that had started it all. The lullaby, the song that had turned chaos into calm, fear into family. Davide came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders, his breath warm against my neck. "What are you writing?" "Our story," I said, "in case I ever forget how it started." He kissed the top of my head. "You could never forget." I smiled. "Maybe not, but I like to remember." Outside, the moon hung over the villa like a promise. The air was quiet except for the distant sound of waves from the lake and the soft breathing of the boys down the hall. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sang for coins, the one who thought love was a luxury for other people. I thought about how a song had carried me from a street corner to this life, this family, this forever. I turned in Davide's arms and whispered, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't walked into your house that day?" He smiled, eyes half-lidded. "Then my sons would still be screaming, and I'd still be a ghost. And now—" He kissed me softly. "Now I'm alive." I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, a sound that had once been foreign and was now home. Music drifted through the window, faint and sweet, the same lullaby I'd sung that first day. I closed my eyes, letting it wash over me, and knew, without question, that some songs don't end. They just change shape, turn into laughter, footsteps, the quiet hum of a family breathing the same air. Forever and always.